Hello everyone, Tmmgamer here, and today I have the pleasure of bringing you another one of my football talk videos, a series where I sit down and talk a little about real life football over the top of some football gameplay in the background. So let's get straight onto the topic, and today's topic is safe standing in football grounds. Now this is a really important topic in the context of British football for a number of reasons, but what's really encouraged me to come out and finally talk about this is the fact that this week Bristol City have announced plans to become the first club in the United Kingdom to install rail seats, which have been pioneered in the German Bundesliga. The best example of this is at FC Dortmund for their Westfalenstadion, I think it's called. Unbelievably fantastic stadium. Personally, I think it's one of the best stadiums in Europe, probably the best. It's certainly on a par with everything. It has some of the best atmosphere, and some of the best fans in Europe go to that stadium. It really is a tremendous sight. But there's always been a really strong movement in England especially against standing at football grounds. And the reason why this is, or certainly the main reason, is obviously the Hillsborough disaster. And if you guys don't know what the Hillsborough disaster is, I urge you to go and look it up and Wikipedia it or Google it. There's lots of information there, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about all the inside details because I wouldn't do it justice. It's a massive defining moment in the history of English football and in the history of sports in general, so it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't heard much about it. But basically, it was a disaster which happened at the Hillsborough football ground involving Liverpool fans, where 96 fans unfortunately passed away and were killed in the disaster. And ever since that day, there have been several reports published against standing at football grounds. Clubs in England, their stadiums are by law all-seater stadiums, and they have to be all-seater stadiums partially and almost completely because of this Hillsborough disaster. But there's a big push now in England and up and down the leagues, but obviously Bristol City's the main one, and several Premier League clubs want this as well, Aston Villa being a major player in this area. But they want to bring standing back into football grounds, and their sort of arguments are, football has moved on the long way, safety's moved on the long way. These are not the pens that were in the past, that really played a key part in Hillsborough. And I'll talk a little bit about pens in a little bit, but I'm just going to outline the argument first. They say we could get more fans in, we could charge less to encourage a higher price, higher capacity, which in turn would raise more money for the clubs when you think about it. If you get more people in the stands, it doesn't matter if they're paying £2 less if you get an extra 10,000 people in. So you can increase your revenue streams that way. It encourages better atmospheres as well, because atmospheres at certain football grounds can be a little bit stilted and cold when everyone's sitting down, not really getting into the game. And then whenever you do stand up and get into the game, you're told on the tannoy system to sit down, it's unsafe, etc, etc. And that's their argument. It would increase capacities, it would increase the amount of money they'll get, improve the atmosphere, and it will generally be a good thing for all concerned. Now the counter argument comes very strongly from people who say that, have we not learnt anything from Hillsborough? 96 Liverpool fans lost their lives on that horrible day. Do we have to have another disaster for us to say we should not do standing in football stadiums? Standing ruins the view for people behind you. It's unsafe. We've had reports showing it's unsafe. Will it really increase the capacity that much? And even if it is going to increase the capacity, is it worth risking the health and safety of fans for a little bit of extra money? So that's the basic outline of the debate. Now, I want to start off by saying that football stadiums, the whole experience of going to a football match is very important, and this is the major way we get new youngsters into football. So firstly, we need it to be an enjoyable environment where they can come to football, appreciate the game, have a good time, and most importantly go home safely and happily. And that's the major thing there. So the first thing I wanted to say is, if you did put all standing sections back in, it's going to be very difficult for children in that section, because if they're standing behind a 6'6" guy, they aren't going to see much of it. They're going to be cold, they're going to be standing on their feet for a long time, they might not see much of the action, and they can go home very disappointed, and that's a fan we've lost, or a potential player. all because their early experiences at a football ground were negative ones. Now, I'm not saying negative experiences are completely linked to standing, not at all, but standing brings with it its own set of problems, like I mentioned, the obscured view. So if we were going to bring safe standing in, and we were going to bring it in stadium wide, we would have to have certain sections for family, which obviously happens now. There are family stands in most grounds in the country, but it would have to be really, really carefully thought out how we can, balance the needs between all of the different spectators, because it's definitely that experience at a football match which gets you hooked. I can still remember my first game as a football fan. I went to Villa Park, I saw Aston Villa win 2-0 against Tottenham Hotspur. Ian Taylor scored both the goals, and from that point on I wanted to go back, and that was because I had a really good time. I was with my dad, in a nice seat, in a good stand, and I had a good time. Whether I would have had the same amount of fun standing behind some really tall guy, that is another question to be asked. But that's my first point on the matter. The second point as well is, this country has had a huge football disaster which has been related to standing. So there has to be no concern at all about the safety factor. It has to be not a problem. And that's going to be a very, very difficult thing to achieve, because the Hillsborough Families Association is pretty resolutely against standing just on principle. And you can fully understand that viewpoint, you really can. These are families who are still struggling to come to terms with the disaster that's happened, not helped by the fact that cover-ups galore have happened with this. And, we've still got evidence coming out, and the original ruling of the case, which blamed the fans basically, is still very, very raw in people's minds. I went to university in Liverpool. I know a lot of Liverpool fans, and Hillsborough is something that you learn about pretty quickly if you go to Liverpool, if you live in the city. It's still a fabric of city life, and I tell you, it's very, very hard to locate a Sun newspaper in Liverpool, and I don't buy the Sun newspaper anyway, but the Sun newspaper was the paper that published the story straight after Hillsborough that it was the fans' fault, that the fans were the problem, that it wasn't the bad policing or all the other problems, that it was all the fans, they killed themselves. And the backlash that happened means that even all this time on, you'll still find it very, very difficult to find and buy that newspaper in that city, just because of how raw the emotion still is. So this is the scale of the opinion safe standing has to come up against. So that's the arguments pretty much against it. Will it improve the atmosphere? That's debatable. We have all of this sort of history against it. Is it really worth taking a step backwards? Now, the arguments in favour of this safe standing, the major one is, coming from the football clubs saying, capacities, they're a bit of a meaningless number at the moment, because the grounds are very, very rarely full. I mean, just look at Aston Villa. Aston Villa have a 40-odd thousand capacity stadium. I cannot remember the last time it was full, and this is because, we're in a bit of an economic downturn. We may have come out of it at the moment, but for the average family, they aren't really going to notice too much of a difference in their disposable income. And there's no doubt that football is a ludicrously expensive hobby. I mean, again, looking at Aston Villa, average ticket price for an adult in a good seat is going to be between £35 and £45, which is a lot of money. That's a huge amount of money for 2 hours, not including travel, not including drinks, food. If you come with a family, they want a programme as well, add the programme on top of that. You can be spending £100 on 2 hours at a football ground with a family. And that is a huge amount of money to spend. So the first major argument in favour says that if we bring safe standing back, we'll be able to lower the costs of this day out for families, because we'll be able to charge less for the standing areas, so we'll be able to make a cheaper option for people to come and enjoy the football, which should hopefully encourage more people to come. People who perhaps don't have the luxury of having £500, £600 they can spend on a weekend, suddenly they can come and watch the football again. Because there's no doubt, if you're an Arsenal fan, you cannot go and watch your team play very often, because they are charging ludicrous prices for tickets. Over £100 for a matchday ticket is robbery. It really is. For the average family, there is no way they can afford a ticket for a matchday, and season tickets are so expensive as well. So that would hopefully enable more people to come and watch. The other argument, like I've touched on this briefly earlier, is the atmosphere. The atmosphere of football grounds is key. You know, you can always notice a good atmosphere at a football ground, and the standing element, I think, would bring something more to that, because you're more involved in the action. You know, if you've got a lot of people standing around you, having a good time, you're gonna notice it a lot more than just people sitting down, not particularly interested. You know, it definitely helps you get involved in the match more often. So that would increase again people's capacity to come to a football game, because not only is it slightly cheaper, but the atmosphere is better when it gets there, and it's just a better overall spectacle. And hopefully, in the Aston Villa's case, it might actually improve the team and get behind them a little bit more, so they have a slightly better home record, which would be nice. But you know, that's another major thing in favour of safe standing, getting this atmosphere back. And I have to say, you know, the safety concern is completely valid, but we've come a long way from the problems that caused the Hillsborough disaster. And you know, the main causes of that disaster were the pen system. And if you don't know what a pen is, basically what it was a fenced off section of the stadium, because you know, in the 60s, 70s and 80s, England had a lot of problems with football hooliganism, and one of the solutions that they came up with at the time was these fenced off sections of stands called pens, where supporters would be kept apart from each other with the idea to lessen the violence and the aggression and the disputes and whatever happened at football grounds, to try and cut that out as much as possible. Now, this was a great idea in theory, but what happened in Hillsborough was there were 3 pens in the stadium, and then the police didn't correctly allocate funds into the 3 different ones. They basically got all funneled into the middle one, which caused a massive crush of bodies, which caused the problems and the eventual fatalities. So you know, the current version of safe standing has no pens at all, because they had just a disastrous idea, fully shown in the Hillsborough tragedy. The modern iteration of safe standing has rail seats, and what basically these are, it's a row of seats which can be either bolted down or fastened back up depending on what you want it to do. So you can have them standing or you can have them seating, and what this would enable clubs to do is sell 1 ticket for a place, so there wouldn't be this massive overcrowding. And it's definitely the overcrowding which causes problems with standing spectators. You know, standing in itself isn't a problem. You know, I don't suddenly have my leg fall off because I stand off for too long, or I don't suddenly have a nosebleed for standing up too long. But if there's a lot of people around you jostling, you know, getting aggressive, getting fired up at the match, and then that causes a crush, then that's when the problems happen, and then that's when disasters can happen, as we've seen before. So these rail seats help eliminate that, because there's a bar in front of you, there's one defined spot for a spectator, so there's no overcrowding. It, you know, stops people from pushing forwards and pushing backwards. It's a lot more regimented, and you know, this has been trialled successfully in the Bundesliga for many years now. And like I mentioned, actually the guy in this game is wearing the Dortmund kit. You know, Dortmund have probably the best example of this in the Westfalen Stadium, when they have tens of thousands of spectators stand very safely in a fantastic atmosphere in a ground which sells out most weeks. I mean, Dortmund have a higher average capacity than FC Barcelona do, so it shows that it works. You know, it does work as long as it's policed safely. And this is another thing that I wanted to say. You know, the policing of major sporting events has come on so far since Hillsborough. It really has. You know, the police failures on the day were catastrophic at many levels, and it's still taking, you know, 20 years, 25 years to get these failures to come to light, because of the cover-ups and because of the lack of information and all that sort of stuff. So it's taking a little bit longer than it has to get all of this information out for all of those reasons. But you know, the policing systems used now, and the multitude of cameras and all of this technology, means that police can much more safely control the environment of a sporting event. And that's the key thing, because you know, like I mentioned, safety has to be the primary concern at a sports ground. When you get 60, 70, 80,000 people in one place at a time, you have to be able to make sure that they're all going to be going home in the same state that they arrived. You know, that's the basic, you know, rule 1 of hosting an event, that the people coming to that event can come, enjoy the event, and go home safely. You know, of course, that's the main thing. But with all of these trials in Germany and the rail seats proposed, it's fairly clear to see that the mistakes from standing in the past have been seen, they've been worked out of the system, and a new safer system has come in. So this is a really, really difficult discussion because obviously it's a very, very charged one. There's a lot of opinions on both sides of it, and a lot of opinions which are very, very valid on both sides of the argument. But for me, I think this has to be trialled now. You won't know just how successful or unsuccessful it's going to be until you have a trial, and I think it's the right way to do it, to have a small-scale trial at a club like Bristol City, stadium like Ashton Gate, not the biggest stadium, but not a tiny local club ground which only holds 500 people. Give it a few months, give it a year, doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as it's given enough time. See how it works in practice. See if we can translate what happens in Germany to Britain. See what the police think. See what the Hillsborough Family Association think. Get as many opinions as possible. With a topic like this, there really is no maximum time frame, in my opinion. It's much, much better to take a little bit of extra time to get this right than to rush it in and risk recriminations or risk public anger, or at the bottom line, risk another disaster. And that's the last thing anybody wants, is another Hillsborough, which is just a disaster of a horrible scale and something that no right-minded human being ever wants to see again. So it's definitely a tough one, but I think with the right trials and the right policing and the right sensible outlook on this from all parties, we can get to a situation where standing can return safely to English football grounds. So guys, thank you so much for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. I would really be interested to hear what you guys have to say about this, because like I mentioned, it's a very, very emotive topic and it's definitely worth having a discussion about. So once again, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.